Tonight, there's really three themes that we want to address in this conversation. One is different expressions of gender inequality. One is examples of successful strategies to achieve gender equality in different fields and contexts. And the third is creating conditions for gender equality in the next decade. The other thing that's really interesting is that everyone in the room has already provided some input to us as they registered for this event. So I'm going to read a couple of stats for you. 72% of today's attendees do not think that women and men have equal access to opportunities in Los Angeles. And actually, people aged 35 to 44, for them, that number was 84%. So there's almost a consensus that there's a lack of equality and equal access. And when we asked people, what their wish was as it relates to this issue, we heard equal pay, more transparency and empowerment in the workplace, representation of women in leadership roles, men holding each other accountable, more mentoring for younger women, and an open discussion about inequality. So that's exactly what we're hoping to engage in tonight, and hopefully we'll be able to share some lessons learned on how to potentially address the gender inequality that we, for the most part, see and experience here in Los Angeles. So now I'm going to give this to Hallie Applebaum, who is going to introduce the panelists. And I can introduce you.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm supposed to be doing this. Oh. Okay, well, there you go. Go for
You want me to read that?
You can do whatever you want.
Okay. Hallie is the founder of Future of Women, which creates original multimedia content by and about women from around the world, empowering them to act on their dreams. She began her career at Wells Fargo Advisors before moving to the World Bank to advise policymakers at national governments in the Middle East and Latin America on developing programs that support creativity and entrepreneurship in cities.
Thank you. Great, so I'll go ahead and introduce the rest of the folks. So Emily is a film producer and entrepreneur known as the founder and CEO of crowdfunding platform Seed and Spark and producer of the 2010 film Like the Water. Seed and Spark allows to make movies in a healthier environment and combines the benefits of subscription streaming for audiences with the career-building power of crowdfunding for creators. Schenae Rourk. Schenae is the president of the LA chapter of the National Association of Women Business Owners, a chair of Metro Transportation Business Advisory Council, and co-chair of the Small Business and Labor Workforce Committee at BizFed. She's contributed to encouraging and supporting initiatives for women-owned businesses and contracting opportunities at Metro LA, and has a passion for assisting underprivileged youth in gaining educational opportunities. Liliana is a social entrepreneur that believes in the power of the tag. I want to understand that in more detail. Throughout her career, she's been driven to help people become exceptional technical professionals and is the heart and soul behind Sabio, a tight-knit community that goes beyond a coding program. And Maceo Paisley. Maceo is an LA global shaper, multidisciplinary artist, designer, and cultural producer who explores themes and societies and identity through movement, language, and imagery. He's the founder and executive director of Citizens of Culture, a nonprofit organization that uses arts and media to develop critical thinking, emotional intelligence, and combat resource inequity. And Miki Reynolds is the executive director of Grid 110, an early stage startup accelerator and community development nonprofit she co-founded in 2014. She's been recognized by Mayor Eric Garcetti on behalf of General Assembly and Grid 110, has been recognized by LA Biz Journal as a 2017 Woman of Influence, and was most recently named Tech Week's 100. And then Claire. Claire is the CEO. I guess they already introduced you. Okay, so these are the summary statistics, right, that you were discussing earlier. Yeah, so I think today we're just going to have a candid conversation about the work that each of us is doing, and a lot of that's rooted in the survey that they did before this, understanding where people are coming from, both the challenges of how they experience gender inequity, and then also making it proactive and the solutions that people are coming up with. So if we scan some of these remarks, people want to see more equality in their workspaces, in all parts of their life. They want to see women in higher positions in offices, more opportunity when it comes to hiring, female founders when it comes to funding. And so I want to have a conversation about people's personal work in these areas. So if we start with the pay gap. That's what people often talk about when they talk about inequity. And so the World Economic Forum came out with a report that said it's going to take 100 years to close the gender gap. The year before that, they had said 86, so that's getting larger. I'd love to talk to all of you about your experience in this area. And so some questions that we can start with. Schenae, I'd like to start with you about, let's just jump into it. What are systemic factors that are driving inequality in pay and perceptions, and what can be done to address them?
Well, first, can everyone hear me here? Good? Okay. Thanks for having me today. It's really great to be here. And I just realized in the intro that I probably did not have my hashtag on my name, right?
Okay.
So there goes that generation gap right there.
So tell everyone your hashtag so they can...
What is my hashtag? Schenae Rourk, I think. See, that's how bad it is. It's terrible. I have a social media crew. I'm sorry. So yes, I am with NAWBO LA. And I think systemically what's been happening, I grew up in an era where it was okay for women not to have a voice. And it became acceptable, and you learned how to navigate around that. You learned to navigate around the sexual harassment that was coming your way. You knew how the tips and tricks to get away from it. So I think what's happening now is there's a voice for everyone, the men and women who are saying that's not what we want to do anymore. We're not going to be guided by what our parents thought was acceptable, which is don't say anything, don't rock the boat, just get through it. It's not like that anymore. So I think what it's going to take to make the change is really the voices of everyone today to say, I want to be a part of that conversation, and I want to make the change and be the change. And so if you don't like I saw a lot of things on here that said, I'd like to see, it puts it out on other people. What is it that you're going to do in that conversation to make it happen? I think it starts with you. So that's where the change happens.
When we spoke on Friday, you mentioned some specific actions that you're involved in. Can you tell people more about that?
Sure. So NAWBO LA, our NAWBO, who in here knows about NAWBO, National Association of Women Business Owners? Okay, all right, and NAWBO LA. So NAWBO was started in 1975, and it started because every woman in this room could not write a check. You could own a business, you could have children, you could do whatever you want to do, but you could not write a check. So if you had a business and wanted to get a loan, you could not do that unless you had your son do it or your husband. This is 1975. I don't know if any of you were born then. Has anyone been born during that time? Was anyone here? All right, so not too long ago, but 1975. Okay, here we go. So hence the hashtag, right? So in 1979, NAWBO LA came about. So in 1975, NAWBO was started because women said, FT, I do that a lot now, so you'll know what the FT stands for, I think. FT, we're going to change that. And that's how NAWBO came about. And then you had to think about that for a minute, right? The FT? Exactly. I think that might be my hashtag. That's going to be my new hashtag. But in 79, NAWBO LA came about for that very reason, really to empower women and the voice of women. So that stemmed HR 5050, which started this whole movement about women's business councils, women be able to write their own checks for their own loans. And, I forgot to tell you, before HR 5050, if you were able to get a loan and get your son to sign or your husband, you had to promise not to have any children until the loan was paid. It's 75. It's really incredulous when you think about it. So now we have a new bill that's out, and I hope all of you are encouraged as the global change makers that you are to go out and support it. It's SB 826. It's a Senate bill, and it's about gender parity on corporate boards. So what we're looking to do is mandate, because we've asked a lot. 5 years ago, we had a resolution passed that said we want more women on corporate boards. It'd be great to have more women on corporate boards. Wouldn't it be nice if you thought about it? Well, everyone said, we're not going to do that. So now we have a bill in the Senate. It's passed 2 committees. It's onto the Appropriations Committee on the Senate side, and then it will move over to the Assembly side. And what we need is support for everyone in here to call your congressman, your assembly member, senator, and say, I support SB 826. And what this will do when it becomes a law, which is what we're pushing for right now, is that it will mean there's a mandate that you must have in the next 3 or 4 years 3 women on your board if you are a 5-person board or more. This is significantly huge. Any of our situations, any of our issues, and not that men, I don't want to say that I'm bashing men because that's not what we do. We are inclusive of men. But anytime you have women, a different perspective, even in your own conversations, when you have different perspectives, it just makes it more richer, more ideas, more thought come about, more successes. So there are studies about that as well. You can look at the McKinsey study, Credit Suisse did one as well, as where you have women in leadership roles, how the ROI comes about. So I would implore everyone, SB 826, send it to your congressperson.
Can I just say that was one of the most profound cases for optimism that I've heard in a while, which is like, would that our children react as shocked to what we are dealing with now as we do to what women were dealing with in 1975? And that means we can do it, right? So thank you for that perspective.
Thank everyone. Men supported that too, so thank you.
Miki and Liliana, I'd love to hear from your perspectives of being in startups, what kind of navigating the startup entrepreneurship landscape, your experience with pay gap, if any, has been.
Yeah, so in startups, you definitely have to make sure that you are being diligent about who you're hiring and how you are compensating your team. There are different types of compensation that you have to keep in mind, whether you're the person that's hiring people or you're looking to join a startup yourself. You have to think about, obviously, wages, what work are people doing? We're really living in a time where there's so much information. There's an LA-based company that's really wonderful. It's called Comparably. They're doing a really big push on making sure that they gather as much information about the local economy in LA. They've been very active in this space. So if you are looking to get a job in a startup, or if you're going to be hiring, when we're hiring people, you have to rely on these data sources to make sure that you are paying competitive wages to everyone. And the wage really has to be tied to the job function. So that's something that's been very important to us in terms of, like, if we're going to hire an engineer that's going to do X, Y, and Z, what is the market rate for that engineer, regardless of who they are, whether, it's a man, it's a woman, it's someone from a certain demographic. Those factors should not come into play. The only thing that you really want to think about is, what is the function? How competitive do you want to be on the wage side? Then also benefits. That's a huge thing that people sometimes don't think about as compensation, but it's massive. Are you paying for all of your health insurance? Are you paying for half of it? That's a big part of compensation. Another piece is equity. And that's something that, women really need to think about. Like, if you're joining a startup, whether you're actually an employee of a startup or maybe you're advising a startup, maybe, you're a person who's adding value in some way. And if you're going to be receiving equity, you want to make sure that that's documented, that the vesting is fair. All of this stuff is very boilerplate, so to speak, and you just have to do a little bit of research to figure out, hey, if I'm going to join a board and I'm going to dedicate my time, what is a typical vesting cycle, which means how long does it take for me to earn those shares? So when you think about equity compensation, that's very important. And you really need to be thinking about those 3 items, is, the wages, all of your benefits, and then what kind of equity, if any, are you going to receive? Or are there opportunities for you to receive equity down the line? Because you can be leaving a lot of money on the table. In the long term, women live longer than men. And so we need to make sure that we have resources available to us for that longer stretch of life. And equity is definitely a way that you can do that, because it vests over a certain period of time, and it's something that, maybe 1%, the people who made 1% or 5% of Snapchat or of Google, that ends up being millions and millions of dollars one day. So you definitely want to look at all pieces of compensation, and that's something that us as a startup who've had to hire and grow our team, it's something that we always have to be aware of, and we try to be competitive here in Southern California, because it's a very aggressive market right now.
Yeah, so two things that I've seen from the applicant side. So if you're out there looking for a job yourselves in the tech space, something when I saw when we were at General Assembly and coaching our grads and students was that the women applicants, they would look at a job description and they would say, I only meet maybe 20% of this criteria, so I'm not even going to apply for it. The guys would see it and be like, I only meet 20%, I'm totally going to apply for it. And so I think it's like women, if they want to meet 80% of the criteria before they even think that they're an appropriate fit for even applying for it. And so I think it really is just putting yourself out there and advocating for yourself and your skill set, that even though the criteria says this, you may have other skills to bring to the table that you can really push for. And on the other coin of the advocacy side is when you're actually negotiating your salary, it breaks my heart when I don't have people that push back on compensation or who try to negotiate if they just accept a first offer. I'm like, inside of me, I'm like, I have a range, I'm giving you what I think is fair, but I want you to push back on me. And especially with women, I want them to push back. And so I think that there's always room to negotiate, even if it's not the number, if it's the full compensation package, if there are other things that you can negotiate for. It's always a conversation. I think that sometimes people are scared to have that conversation because people don't like to talk about money. People, they want this job really badly. They want this position. They want to work for this company. But I think it's always a conversation. And I think, at least from the hiring side, that people want to have that conversation with you. And so I think that that's something that can lead to potentially, a more equitable, pay opportunity if you're willing to advocate for yourself.
May I offer one counterpoint to that, that I think is just a separate perspective? How many of you run your own companies or plan to? Cool. You are all absolutely responsible for making sure that there is pay equity in your companies and whatever you have to do to ensure that you do that, right? So, we don't allow negotiation at Seed and Spark. We have tiers. And there are part of it is because we're still an early stage startup and we have to manage our costs really, really creatively. And part of it is because we're trying to create a we culture and not a me culture. So if you want to negotiate for a raise, your entire tier has to get a raise. And the company has to be in a position to be able to do that. So then you're really motivated to participate in a certain amount of growth. And that is one of the ways that we address pay equity, because I have to say, I got 2 or 3 years into it, and I looked at at all of the salaries which had been sort of negotiated, and people came in at different times and got different packages and different equity because they had different experience and all of these things. And it wasn't actually that the women were paid less than the men, it's just that it was all over the place, and that felt wrong for a small company to have 12 people making all sorts of different things when, especially at the early stage, you can't really say, this person's job is, we ran fairly flat, right? And so over time, what we have decided to do is there are tiers, right? And there are 3 of them right now. There's sort of entry level, there's director level, and there's executive level, and that's it. And one of the things that we combat, at least in the state of California, is the minimum wage for engineers, which is the most money anybody makes at Seed and Spark, lucky engineers. So there's the engineer level also, which is just something that we have to absorb. But we talk about it extremely openly, and how we structure our pay is part of our company strategy, which everybody participates in. I don't know if this is the right way. It is the way that I'm choosing to address it. And since half of you plan to run your own companies, you also get to make these rules. So I think that's also important to think about is there are other ways besides the way that it's been done, and working better inside that system, you can build new systems.
Yeah, I think the point that you're touching on is actually deeper than either of those for me, because I'm looking at the ideas, beliefs, and values that intersect with the economic solutions that we're coming up with. And so what's underneath both of those is workers value and empowerment and understanding what the compensation is based on. And then whether or not you need to negotiate or whether there's a no negation policy, making sure that we're working at a place where you're valued, first of all, and dealing with, I think, some of the like the cultural ideas that are impressed upon gender in terms of amicability and accepting what's offered, and contending with that internally, and being really clear about your value and your competency, so that way you know that you're being treated fairly, and that actually has the opportunity to shift culture inside of an organization as well.
I mean, are we going to talk about capitalism? Like, is that?
I wasn't going to go there, but I'm ready at any moment to talk about capitalism.
That's actually the problem, if we really want to get to it, but that might be for later. I mean, there's clearly some people who feel the same, but.
Do you want to say something?
We can talk about, so the first thing is that we have to realize that like the contemporary labor paradigm right now is one of exploitation in general. And so like we're talking about pay gaps, we're really talking about fair labor and wage, and also the arts sector is really bad as well. And so it does boil down to like treating people right. And unfortunately, the current system that we're in is imbalanced towards board members, investors, and it unfairly marginalizes and exploits labor. Period. So anybody that's working for someone, if you're going to be a CEO, think about how you're going to bring upon labor is the wealth that we have. It's the planet and people. So think about how you're going to honor that as human beings, and then you see less of the gender imbalance. Less.
A question I'd like to throw out to everyone is, how do we involve men in the conversation as well within the pay gap conversation? Does anyone have?
I have an example that happened just
Perfect.
today. David and Jacob, are you guys still in the room? Oh, there we go. So when I came in, I introduced myself, and they have really started engaging in their own company about that conversation with other women who are brought in around the same time. They're about the same age, and they're sharing that information with each other and becoming transparent. And I think it starts with that kind of movement where let's open, like someone talked about transparency, let's open it up, let's see what's really behind here. And do you guys remember the show Friends? I think I'm totally dating myself here right now. All right, but Friends, it was iconic at one point. One of the actors was making more money, and so he went to the others and said, let's negotiate where we all get the same thing. And isn't that really novel? I think, why isn't it that way? And then recently, I think someone was getting paid more for doing a reshoot of something, and the woman got very low, and he shared that information. So really the conversation is an open, transparent conversation. A lot of times, because women are not always paid as well as men in some of these situations, it will require conscious men to be engaged in part of that program as allies to open it up and make the emperor have no clothes on and see what's really underneath there.
I want to move on to the next topic, which is around other ways that we talk about gender inequity around sexual harassment. Reading these statistics, 60% of women across ages and positions of responsibility who had worked at least 10 years at tech companies located mostly in Silicon Valley indicated they'd experienced sexual harassment at work in 2015. Over half of these were initiated by a superior. And then, I mean, here now being in the LA area, we've seen what that looks like in the film industry over the past, I don't know, say 6 months. I would love to hear from you guys kind of what your experience has been with this, how you've seen it in your companies and you personally.
So I'll take this. So what we've implemented at Sabio is a code of conduct. And everyone receives the code of conduct day one, even when they start some of our part-time classes. And we make it very, very clear. Either they hear directly from me or one of the other founders that Sabio is a place where everyone is to be respected and where people need to speak in a professional manner. And we clearly say this is not a place where you're going to have locker room talk, and this is not a place where anyone is going to be demeaned or spoken to in a certain way. And then we also have examples of some talking points, because when you start working with other people and you start talking about how they need to refactor their code and need to think about how to reword things or redo things, that can also get very touchy. So we also have some examples there about how they can be good, respectful colleagues to other people that are also learning and that are also working and improving. We also run a lot of hackathons, and we attend a lot of hackathons, and those are kind of just crazy events where people are there, they're tired, they're stressed out, and during those hackathons, when people register, you also have a code of conduct. And I see that this has been starting to get implemented throughout other tech events, which is really fantastic. So wherever you can be, or if you're ever planning an event, or if you're ever planning some type of an organization, I don't know if you guys have a code of conduct for your global shapers, but it needs to be very clearly spelled out. Like, this is a place where everyone is respected and people are treated a certain way, and people literally have to sign on the dot, and they get a copy, and we keep a copy. And when anything comes up, we're like, hey, you remember this? Like, we were serious about this. And we have expelled people who are perfectly fine developers, but don't know how to act and don't know how to be decent human beings. And we're like, you know what? You just cannot be part of this community. And, that's something that's very important to us. And unfortunately, it happens maybe once a quarter where we have to kick one person out of 50 that we have. But it's something that's very important for us, and we set that tone. And you know that if you're attending a Sabio event or a Sabio class, it's a place where everyone's going to get treated with respect.
I love that. I think that's really powerful. I would add that in my perspective, this is the tech community and the film community are blemishes that represent underlying cultural issues that have less to do with sexual harassment in the workplace, but sexual harassment like in the world. And so while we're creating rules that talk about conduct at work or in these specific environments, we also have to think about the interpersonal interactions that happen outside of the workplace that this is like spilling over into. So we measure sexual harassment in the workplace, but we don't measure sexual harassment in the same way because there's no legal framework to report sexual harassment from someone on the train necessarily. So I think there's some specific cultural reasons why you see these bubbles, but it is a social issue that we're dealing with that undergirds every industry and is a part of America. So that should be said. And I think the other part of it is breaking down and not letting shame and what have you create silos of suffering. And a large part of the keeping men accountable is men knowing which other men should be held accountable. And so that's a very important thing that I've experienced. The guy to my right has, misconduct on his record, but no one's talked about it, at least to the degree that would make it seem, relevant to bring up, to kick someone out. And so I think it's important that, people continue to come forward as well.
Yeah, I'll just add, I totally agree with you, Maceo. Like, it's very hard to say, like, this is one person at work and someone else when they go home. Like, people are pretty consistent. And the thing that was so upsetting to me about, when I read Susan Fowler's blog post was about her experience at Uber last year, was the first time I had really taken the time to sit and read and think about this intensively. And I've had my own experiences, and I know friends who've had experiences, but for some reason her story really stuck with me. And the thing that was so upsetting was, this is not just a coffee shop that she's going to, right? This is her workplace. This is how she makes her money. This is like her livelihood. And she's still being subject to this behavior. And I think, so that's why I've chosen to focus in the workplace. I think you can kind of go like outside in or inside out or both at once. And I think we should. And one thing I was just gonna add is, I think a code of conduct is awesome because people need clarity about what behavior is appropriate and what behavior is not. But I also...
Well, they can't claim that their free speech is being impinged on after the fact if you've stated the rules up front.
Exactly.
Which is a popular place that people fly to.
Yeah. But I think that, when I started doing some research after I read about the Uber incident, and I looked at some EEOC data and read that 75% of incidents of harassment are never reported. So to me, that's this huge failure in the system to hear people's stories and understand what they're going through and be able to actually solve their problems. And then at the same time, I read another stat that also said that 75% of people who did report experienced some form of retaliation at work. So it's like, well, of course people aren't reporting. That makes complete logical sense. Why would you report if 3 out of 4 people are being retaliated against in a way, again, that affects their livelihood? So, yeah. go ahead.
So I think something that is uncomfortable but important to say is that sexual harassment is normal. It's normal. It's more normal than not being sexually harassed if you're a woman.
Yes.
Rape in this country is normal. It's like probably more normal than not being raped. And those are really fucking uncomfortable facts to sit with. We have allowed this to become normal. And that is it extends far beyond the workplace. It extends deep into our interpersonal relationships. And I do think when livelihood is involved, obviously that adds layers of complexity around power. And I know from my own personal experience, at least in the entrepreneurship journey, as it were, the sexual harassment I experienced, or incidences of just like sort of extraordinary gender bias, all happened outside of a formalized like professional relationship. So it was with an investor who's an investor in the company, but not doesn't have any sort of power over me otherwise, or with an investor who I was thinking about taking investment from, or maybe a vendor or something like that. But because I run my own company, I don't have a boss, right? There isn't anybody above me who can harass me and threaten my livelihood. But there are plenty of people I encounter who still perform this behavior. And then what is my recourse, right? And that I think is one of these complexities. And I will say that at least for me personally, the strength of the Me Too movement is I've been able to say things in professional settings that I don't feel like I was able to say before, feeling like there are like a couple million women behind me being like, yeah, what she said. And I think that's an important moment that does feel like a shift to me. But I sit in this position of also not having that much to lose, right? And so thinking about the power structures also that sort of reinforce some of this behavior, capitalism, that's one of the things that I think we still really have to pick away at before we're going to get to that thing where we can't believe it ever used to be like this.
I'll say one tiny thing before we move away. So I'm a mom of 2 little boys. Gregorio and I have 2 little boys. And I attended this amazing training session when they were teeny tiny that was held in our community center. And this woman came in and she talked about how we had to empower our children from a super young age to be the boss of their body. And I think for me and for our family, that's been really transformative. And the concept of telling them when they were like 2 years old, like, hey, your body is yours and no one has domain over it. Mommy and a doctor will help and make sure that you're healthy. But other than that, no one can tell you what to do or what not to do with your body. And I hope that that type of like agency is something that more people would foster in men and in women, because I think it would, really kind of give people a lot more empowerment about like, hey, this is my body, and if you're doing something or saying something about it, that's just not cool. And I don't think we've had that type of a cultural awareness, and I think it's very much needed.
Thank you. Shifting gears a little bit, this is the one I wanted. So an interesting fact that I learned actually through talking to the Global Shapers was that women are more likely to be brought into, in a crisis situation, to lead a company than not. And so I wanted to ask the panelists if they've seen that that be the situation, because bringing someone in to lead a company when it's struggling, that's a challenging circumstance to be put in, and a lot to kind of be held up to the success of the company, because if the company fails, well, was it this woman's fault or not? Have you guys seen examples of that?
Well, I'll say, I think women are great at creating solutions So I think that is definitely a reason why women are looked to for that. But I know stories where men have come in and saved and turned around situations as well. And I think it's because of the why. You know, we talk about sexual harassment and what we need to do about that. But I think when we really look at if you're going to be employed at a company, what is that structure from the top? Because if they don't get it, like at Uber, right, what recently happened, if they don't get it, you're not going to get any support wherever you are. You can get a little group, but you're not going to get any support. So you really need to understand the corporate structure before you put yourself, I think, in those kind of situations, thinking that it's not going to happen to you, because it could. So I think that's part of it. And then, you know, I think women solve a lot of problems, so I think maybe I'm a hard person to say that. I think we're all Wonder Women, and there are some conscious men in here who are Wonder Men too, so thank you to you as well. But, you know, women have a unique gift from the onset when we're born, because we have to be resilient. We're born into this world that has a culture that doesn't see us on equal ground as men. So you have to be resilient through your years and life growing up. And those messages come early. It's not when you're in school or even when you're going for a job. Those messages come early in life, like, oh, you play with the pink, you know, Barbie dolls, and let him play with the G.I. Joe or play with the truck. No, you can't play with this because you're going to get hurt. Those little messages come in like, you know, so when I talk to my children, I have a boy and a girl, equally, it's about they're both empowered. They can do whatever they want to do. You know, I gave my son pink, goldfish the other day. And he's like, and my daughter goes, why does he get the pink goldfish? I'm like, because he likes the ones that are less cheesy than you. You like the extra charged cheesy, whatever they are. So I'm like, okay, it's goldfish, right? So, but to me, there's nothing different about that. And I try to be as equal as I can, but we also are part of that. We look at others and we're having these conversations, which is great. But I think that we are part of that solution that has to happen. And we're born into a society that doesn't agree with that. So we have to make the change and look at ourselves. And I know some of you, someone had a USOW bag the other day, wearing it proudly. I love that. All right, there we go. United States of,
yeah.
Yes, it was a wonderful conference if you attended that. And Stella, thank you for putting on a fabulous conference there. That was wonderful. One of the things that Michelle Obama said, which really still impacts me today, is why did we feel that a woman who was qualified to a job, politics aside, because you may agree with her politics or not, but she was a politician who's been in the trenches before. Why did we feel that she was not able to run this country as much as a man who has openly, repeatedly created atrocities to women? And we have to look at ourselves as a society, ourselves as women, that we were okay with that at the time. I think now it's brought up a rising, like, wait a minute, we didn't really want that to happen, but we didn't really all engage. I think a lot of minorities did, a lot of black women did, they went out and vote, but a lot of white women didn't do as much on that voting on that side. So what is it about that with us that a woman can't be in charge, a woman can't be empowered? So we can look out and say, oh, well, you know, we need this, we need that, okay, what are we doing to change that dynamic?
If I could interpret this slide a second, you know, it kind of is put flatly out there, but I think what it speaks to is opportunity disparity. And you see this with marginalized groups of all kinds, right? Whether it's like someone who doesn't have the right pedigree or, you know, educational background, you're not going to get the opportunity to be CEO. What it illustrates is that you wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to be CEO unless you took the job that no one else wanted to take and put your career on the line to sort of right the ship and do this Herculean task. Because one, you might not have the opportunity otherwise, and then you also find that some of your colleagues might have more to lose, and that the opportunity could come up in 3 to 5 years if they just sort of keep their head down. So you find marginalized people taking greater risks, and sometimes it pays off and sometimes it doesn't. But I think that's what I saw was important to pull from that, is that there is an opportunity gap as well. And so that's why you see people taking the job as CEO in these horrible situations.
So that's a perfect segue into strategies for success, thinking about equalizing compensation and being transparent about pay. Yeah, so some facts here that women working, I mean, you've probably heard this many times, make 88 cents on the dollar. That, yeah, female doctors and surgeons earn 71% of what their male colleagues make, and while female financial specialists are paid just 66% to men. Yeah, that women 1 year out of college earn 6.6% less than men after controlling for occupation and hours, and that women MBA graduates earn on average 4,600 less than their male classmates. And so something I wanted to ask your opinion on is Salesforce spent about $3 million equalizing compensation across the company. Do you think that like equalizing compensation like that, have you done that in your own companies? I know some people have talked about that, but what has been the response to that? What has been the impact of that?
You know, there was a, and I don't know if this bill passed or not. A lot of things can be done through bills and through advocacy. I don't know if you guys know that, but that'll be a common theme with me. But a bill about transparency, and I believe, so I sit on the Small Business and Labor Workforce at BizFed, which is an organization of about 176 member organizations that really advocate on behalf of business here in the county of LA. The bill came through, and I think it got squashed, and it got squashed because some small businesses felt that, and I'm just sharing information, so don't kill the messenger here, felt that, especially in the restaurant industry, where you know, whether you feel they get paid equally or not, is that if you own a restaurant and you have 500 employees and you have to shift everything and make everyone have the same pay, that would be onerous for them. So I think there was some lobbying that went around that, so I don't know if it got passed. But there is another bill, I think, that's coming out, and I don't have all that information about it. But again, bills are really a way to look at some of that on equal pay. I want to just say something about that Freakonomics. So see, this is this new generation. I'm loving that. I don't know what it means, but I'm going to look it up. Freakonomics. Okay, there we go.
So the sad and depressing thing about this Salesforce thing is that they had to do it twice. So they spent $3 million in 2015, and then 2 to 3 years later, they're like, man, we have another gender pay disparity. We got to go and fix it again. So, I mean, that just speaks volumes about how, you know, how we're structured. And, you know, it's tragic. We live in a fantastic state of California where now you can no longer get asked how much money you are making when you're getting a new job. And that is huge. That is so fantastic because employers love using that as like a crutch. Like, well, you were only making 100, so if I give you 110, you should be happy, even if engineers are supposed to be making 120, 130.
And you can ask for the range as a candidate, right? You can ask what their range is.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So in California, you know, I think we're going to see a lot of this gender disparity hopefully decrease. But yeah, Salesforce had to do that twice, and so that's.
This was my first experience with Global Shapers. I had aged out before it was incepted, unfortunately, but this seems like a group of people that I would like to be a part of because you are the people shaping shit. So as the entire, it's still round, I think, but let me know if you guys have different plans for it. It's personal responsibility. In this room, it's personal responsibility because you are going to run your companies. You are going to be making these decisions. And there is so much information freely available on the internet about how to close the pipeline gap, how to close the wage gap at your companies. There is no excuse. There is no excuse. You can go to the Kapoor Center. There are tons and tons of resources there. There are myriad startups helping you address bias in your job descriptions and bias in your interview processes and bias in your candidate sourcing. And frankly, like if you are not, do you guys know the Rooney Rule?
Cool. Not a lot of football fans in here. I wasn't either. I don't want to like put myself up as a. He was a football team owner who was like, you have to interview at least one candidate of color for every position that opens up. And then all of a sudden, the organization started to look a little different. And there are people that's like a very, very low bar to set. But imagine if you were like, we're just gonna make sure we're gonna interview one woman and a few people of color, or like maybe we'll make the lists crazy 50-50. And that will start to change the way that it's not, we're not talking about quotas because that seems to upset people. We're talking about just like taking the responsibility to make sure that your pipeline, who you are interviewing for positions, is diverse. And that means you have to do the work to make sure that your job descriptions don't then all of like already, as you guys were discussing before, like already prejudice the candidates sort of against themselves. And I will say, I had the opportunity the other day. I mean, I work at a small company, like jobs don't come up at Seed and Spark that often. We don't have that many opportunities to do this. But a friend of mine just raised a bunch of money for her company. They're hiring for a couple of dope positions. She sent me a job description and she was like, would you share this out? We're looking for a great candidate. Now, I love her company, I want them to succeed. I saw two things in the job description, one of which was something like, you know, master's degree or higher from a prestige university. Literally, it said that. And I was like, I can't send this to people with that line in there. So if you would be willing to take this out of the job description, and I will also say, people have seen success just putting at the bottom of their job descriptions, even if you don't fit these characteristics, but you think you would have a really good time at this job, write to us and tell us, like, pitch us on it because we might be looking for you, we don't know. And I said, if you would put those two things in, I would be really happy to share it. And so it was something like I couldn't do it at my company, and she wrote back immediately and was like, of course, no problem. We don't even screen for the university thing, I don't know why it's in there. We get into these habits where like, that's what a job description looks like. And you just have to like expend the energy to break these habits and decide to take the responsibility for it. And it is harder, right? But like, we're trying to initiate and we're trying to shape the fucking globe, right? Like nobody said that was gonna be easy. So I want to just say, like, you don't have any excuses when you're in charge, none. And what it takes is greater emotional energy. It takes more time. It takes more attention to detail. And when we are busy startup founders, that can feel like the worst thing in the universe, but not worse than being a non-diverse company with a giant gender pay gap. So I don't know, those are sort of the options.
Yeah, that's great. I think there's one bit on the Uber slide. If we could go back, I don't know if that's possible. This particular episode is of Freakonomics, the podcast, is perhaps the most interesting Freakonomics episode of all. They actually break down the 18% of the pay gap, and they look at where it comes from. And of course, Uber is a rideshare platform where the rate for the driver is predetermined by a computer that doesn't recognize gender. So normalizing for gender, the drivers was where the pay gap was. So this is after Uber had their big sexual harassment thing, and they've changed a lot of internal company policy, but you still see 18% pay gap in drivers even when the computer is picking the route. What they found, though, is that there were some specific reasons why women were making less, and this accounted for a percentage of the 18%. And when they talk about unconscious bias, sexism, stereotypes, and other factors, some of these other factors were the safety that women felt driving at certain hours of the day in correlation to the surge pricing of those particular hours. So this is something that literally has nothing to do with the structure of the company, but is a social condition that is now impressed on an employee that affects their ability to be self-determinate. And so the question there, just for the sake of nuance, is what is Uber's responsibility to account for the fact that women feel unsafe letting strangers drive in their car in the middle of the night? The second thing was, that amounted for part of it, was that there is a learning curve for drivers, and you make more as an Uber driver after you've been driving about 6 months, because you learn what your routes are and you learn your sort of ways of hacking to drop people off and where to pick them up. And typically women they quit Uber sooner than men did. And since men stayed on Uber longer, they ended up being better at hacking the app for income. And so after the 6 month, you see that part of the gap normalize. And so you have to ask, well, why are women quitting Uber sooner than men are? And there were a bunch of reasons. Then the third thing was the amount of hours that people drove. And so if you drive every day for 5 days, you get better as a driver faster than if you drive 3 days out of 5. And so we have to think about values again, and there was a significant disparity between men being okay with burning out and driving the max number of hours and the max number of days, and women doing things like picking up their kids and cooking dinner for their families. And so we have to, one, look at economic labor, how we value that, but we also have to look at the decisions we make in our lives and whether or not companies like Uber and others should be responsible for creating those shifts. And I think domestic labor, capitalism, domestic labor is a thing that's very undervalued and
Very gendered.
And very gendered, and in this particular case, affects people's livelihoods and a portion of the gender gap. So that's just something that I wanted to point out. I think everyone should definitely look at that episode because there's some subtleties there that we often overlook.
I think one of the things I want to say, if you're looking to work somewhere, when you think about HR, think about all the resumes that they're getting in. So their goal is to make their life easier, and they want to find a reason why they want to cross you off, and they want to do it quickly. So I suggest to people, put maybe your first initial and last name, or if you're in an area where you can impact the policy, redact all that information that shows gender or shows ethnicity and give that to your HR people so that they have a more equal playing ground based on skill set and not based on personal biases, which we all have. We all need to recognize we all have them. So I think if you implement something like that in there, that would be great. Back to the pay question as well. I've noticed when I ask, and now they do have that new law, which is really great, hard sometimes on small businesses, but when they ask the questions, women tend to ask it as a question versus a statement. Oh no, I need $100,000 versus I need $100,000? And we're like, no, you're not gonna get $100,000. So that's the negotiation part. So you need to make sure when you're making your statements, come in knowing your SHIT, like she so profoundly said, know that. I do the FT. She does the SHIT.
I clearly need hashtags.
Yes.
Somebody needs to give me some hashtags.
Right. So know that when you're going in and be say, no, if you have to get in front of the mirror every day and say, this is the amount, repeat, practice for yourself every day so that when they ask you that question, you're comfortable answering it with a statement that it belongs to you and it's yours.
I just want to add one thing. I agree with Emily. I think the responsibility is on us and the responsibility is on the company to try to solve a lot of these problems, like the problems that Maceo raised. I believe that's Uber's responsibility to figure out solutions, incentives, workarounds, so that there is equality in the pay for their drivers. But I also think each of us can do something else on the side, in addition to the changes that we're making at our companies, which is mentoring people. It's really, really important to, until we close the pay gap, do what we can, not only in our own companies, but in our communities, in our circles of friends of friends, like all take a certain number of like calls or meetings that have no benefit to me at all each week, but that hopefully I can help someone else get, the raise that they deserve, or negotiate their starting salary, or even just know like what they should be asking for. A lot of times, like, companies put you in a really uncomfortable position and they say like, well, what do you want to make? And so then you're forced to set the range for your own salary. And I've talked to a lot of people who are like, 25, 26, 27, they're younger, they're not as confident in the negotiation process. I think those of us who are more experienced have a responsibility to actually be a mentor to people throughout those processes, and that can have a lifelong impact on someone's earnings and earnings potential.
Tagging onto the mentoring concept, which I think is super important. I've never had a female boss, and so I've always worked for men. And I never had that woman to aspire that would take me under their wing and kind of help me along. And so I looked to peers or just looked inward for that for myself. So when I had the opportunity to hire and when I hired women, I made sure that that was an important relationship that I had with those women candidates, was to mentor them along in their process. And then for any of you that are actually looking, there's this really great website called Out of Office Hours. There's a ton of different people. It's for people that are interested in maybe transitioning into tech, or maybe you're already in tech and you're just looking to seek advice from somebody else. It's hundreds of people across different roles in tech that are volunteering time, like 5 hours of their time a month. You get to sign up every month through a Calendly, and you can, if you're interested in meeting the director of UX for this company or head of engineering for this company or a CEO or a founder, whatever your interest is, if that's something that you personally are looking for, there are resources for you out there. You just have to go seek it out.
Thank you. With that, I want to open it up to questions. Julia.
Microphone.
Oh, I need
Only
that.
a Google.
Does this oh, it does actually work. Very cool. I feel very goofy with this, I've got to be honest. Okay, my question was going to be about maternity leave and parental leave. There was a time when it seemed like there was not a week that went by without a book that came out about some woman who was both very successful at her career and very successful at home. And then the next week would be someone who, another woman who was very successful at her career and gave up her home life, or vice versa. And it seems to me like, especially with Me Too, we haven't actually gotten back to that question about maternity leave and parental leave and really pushing for some legislation or some policy around it, which ends up creating and cultivating an environment in which women can't necessarily succeed if they do also want to have children, or for that matter, anybody who wants to have kids, adopted or otherwise. So I wondered what your experience or your opinions were about parental leave, particularly those who have their own startups, because I understand there's cost considerations about it as well, and that's why some companies are pushing back on the idea of doing so.
It's hella hard. So one disadvantage of having a company that's mostly women in their 30s is we have 3 pregnant team members right now. We have one who is just about to start back part-time after her maternity leave, and all the guys are single. All the guys are single, ladies. They would want me to tell you. Please, anywhere. It's really hard. We have been extremely lucky so far. So the state of California has sort of as generous a policy as you can get, which is that they cover, I think, 55% for the mom and 45% for the other parent, the birth mom and then the other parent. And that is still a struggle when you go down a person in your startup. And at least what we've done as we've grown, because the first person went out on parental leave when we were 8 people. She was our senior front-end engineer. It was like 4 months after we had relaunched a total like front-to-back rebuild of the website. And I just had to say to her, can we learn how to do this together? And then the second one went on maternity leave, and she's like, I'm Canadian and I want 6 months. And I was like, cool, we are gonna have to figure out something money-wise. We had to bring in an interim person. Fortunately, we grew in the time she was gone, and she will come back to her position and now have someone on her team who was then her replacement. But at each stage, I've basically had to say, what is your individual situation? What can work for you, and also what do you want, right? So the woman who wanted 6 months also was in a position to for us to pay her the New York State minimum, which was like $1,000 a month. Do you know what I mean? And she was in a position to take that, and it was important for her to keep her job. And we've just had to sort of negotiate it one by one, because there is not a one-size-fits-all policy. Like if we had said, okay, we'll do, full paid for 3 months, she'd have been like, fine, I want 6 months, but I want to come back to my job. And she's such a catch. Like I wouldn't want to lose her. So we've had to be really creative. For myself, when I had a baby, I wish I had done better, and I wish the company were in a more stable position when I had a kid. I only took 6 weeks. I hope that that's not how it goes next time. And I do think these things get set from the top. So I came back and I was like, nobody follow this example. So, I don't have I'm sure somebody has a better answer to this, but at least for us in real terms, and because we have such a female heavy team of in prime childbearing years, well, in California, that's like late 30s. We've just had to contend with it a lot and contend with it creatively based on the needs of each person. And everybody at Seed and Spark, part of our culture is nobody's well, she got that and I didn't get this. It's everybody understands that it is to your need, and that's part of the thing that we cultivate. And when we talk benefits, we talk about this very frankly up front. No, we don't have a one-size-fits-all maternity policy. We're gonna wanna talk to you about what you want and need and what we can do. And we'll do everything that we're required to legally and more if we can.
For the founders in this room who are thinking about how they structure HR stuff, was there a resource that you and your team at Seed and Spark use to kind of guide that conversation?
Openness and honesty and asking hella advisors. The thing is, I didn't get satisfying answers from any of my advisors. They all said, oh, we did the state California mandated minimum. And I was like, that doesn't feel good to me. I want to know there aren't models for this because the state provides very little help, because we as a country don't think that apparently maternity is hard. And there's, beyond the mandated, pumping room, which is a really still a very barbaric solution to these things. Not enough of these factors have been considered. So I will say, I found all of them to be very limited in terms of what we're trying to do, which is I'm a tech founder. I'm trying to do the impossible all the time, and I'm trying to do it also in these ways. And that this was our best way forward, was just to say, can this be a negotiation between what you really want and what we can reasonably provide? And let's put all the cards on the table and figure it out. And so far, so good, right? So we're nearly 4 or 5 Seed and Spark babies into this, and so far, so good. But we'll see. And I have a really profligate team. They're just making people. So don't drink the water at Seed and Spark if that's not what you want.
So I think daddy leave is also very, very important, because what happens is that if the dad doesn't have enough time, 2 to 4 weeks, 6 weeks to bond with the baby appropriately and to learn how to properly change a diaper and to learn how to soothe the baby and all of these fun things, when the mom, does need to go to work and the baby is having colic or whatever, if the dad hasn't properly bonded, then they're not going to know what to do, So daddy leave is very, very, very important, and they need that time to bond with the child as well, to make sure that they can both be proper caretakers to this new little creature that's there.
I totally agree with that, and I would just add, whether you believe that a child is, conscious at 3 months, I do believe that a child is aware of what's going on, and they can hear different voices, and they understand who's with them. And we're trying to change culture on the biggest level possible, and that actually starts with a child experiencing both parents taking care of them from the beginning.
How many of you guys have kids? Holy shit. Okay, cool. So I'll just say one thing for those of you who don't is 12 weeks is when it starts getting exciting. The first 3 months they call the 4th trimester. The baby sleeps all the time. if you're lucky. But it is a wild, adrenaline-filled, sleep-deprived, and then around 3 months, like the baby starts to wake up and be a person. It is the cruelest fucking time to ask people to go back to work, actually. And it's why in most other civilized countries, like leave is like 6 to 9 months, because like right when it starts to get good and the thought of leaving your child for an hour feels miserable, that's when we ask women to go back to work, and we've asked men to go back to work before it's even gotten fun, right? And that's crazy. So this is not, this is just about humanity at this point. This isn't, and like, if we can't build that into our startups, we might as well all just give up, in my humble opinion. Like, I know we're building technology, but it's about making people's lives better, ultimately, or faster, or more efficient, or more profitable, or whatever. But like, it's about making people's lives better.
I guess it's me. Hi, my name is Mia Hall. I'm the founder of a program called Brown Girls Glow. It's an out-of-school time program for young women of color. And I don't have a question. I just wanted to speak in this cool mic. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Okay, so 28% of us don't think that there are equal opportunities. You know what I mean? I mean, no, does think that there are equal opportunities for, men and women in California. So can, I mean, I guess you guys posed the question. Can you just say like, okay, this is why it is or it isn't, or like, I just want to know the answer.
There is 28% that believe that?
You're asking about the survey results, right?
So, I mean,
Yeah, where's Pilar? So the Shapers did a great job with the survey, but I don't have those details. We'll come back to you. How about let's do that if. Perfect. So do you want to restate your question for him?
That there are, are there or aren't there equal opportunities for women and men? And,
there's no right answer. Yeah. This is.
Well, these are the wrong opportunities. This study shows, something like
No, so actually, I think on the LA level, we have a few reports. The mayor's office has studied this, and there's a few others. I would say, I'm a scientist myself. We can't survey every single person in this city, and there's no even objective way of doing it in a very precise way. There's if I ask you in the morning and you have a bad experience before that, or in the evening, right? Like, there's always like variance that there is. But I think what we saw in the results was quite kind of very clear. Yeah.
I really need to get one of those.
Hi, thank you for coming here. My name is Shireen, and I'm using artificial intelligence to bring equality to career advancement. And I have a question for anyone on the panel. We know that, as you mentioned, EEOC reports that 75% of people who experience some form of discrimination or harassment end up reporting retaliation as well. And human resource departments are predominantly female. Why is it that they're letting it happen?
I can try to take that. So I think the issue is that human resources responsibility is to, manage risk and mitigate risk and protect the company ultimately. Their job is not to protect the employee. And so I think a lot of people have the concept in the back of their mind that if I go to human resources, they'll help me because they are human resources. They're there for me. That's not the case. And I will say that, I've been talking to a lot of HR people for the past almost year. And most of them are really well-intentioned, nice, kind, compassionate people who want to do the right thing. And the problem is systemic. It's not individual. It's not bad people who are making bad decisions. It's the way we've sort of set them up to fail. So a big part of what I'm trying to do is to sort of augment what the tools that they have at their disposal and the abilities that they have at their disposal with something that actually protects employees' safety a little bit more, so that the options aren't so binary for an employee, so that it's not either I go to HR and potentially experience retaliation, or I do nothing and I'm miserable and I quit, or I sue the company, or I go to the press. Like, there have to be other intermediate steps. Oh, great cat.
I played soccer, so.
She was a goalie.
So hi, my name's Heidi. I'm the managing director of the LA chapter of Girls in Tech. So we do a lot of these similar events too. I'd love to hear from you individually, or whoever wants to take it. Do you feel like we've been moving the mark at all? Like, diversity and inclusion is a great hashtag, but do you feel like we've been actually making a difference? Or are we in this like myopic circle where our friends do see it? And I will tell you today, I went to a lunch kind of interview for a law firm, 3 men. They're still using things like the mommy track, and just because that means that this person is working less hours. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, we're lawyers. I'm supposed to be defending these types of things and be at a greater level, but I hear it every day. And I even have clients who go to their HR, and my first thing is catalog everything. Make sure if you have any retaliation, that's great. Send it to me as soon as possible. It's like, do you think we're actually moving the mark, or is there something better we could be doing?
Well, I would say I definitely think that the mark is being moved because there's buzz, right? People are starting to talk and they're starting to make actions and movements along things. I don't think we're making it everywhere. I mean, if you go outside of our area, even within California, you go to some places and it's still back, it's like back in 1975, really. So I think you have to find your movement with you and help move that along and help push that with, again, it's always about what can you add to that situation to move it forward. But we can't change this overnight because I think we've been born into this. So to make the change that you guys want to see, it's about coming together like the 2 gentlemen that I talked about earlier, having conscious men and conscious women that are part of your group to help move that forward and create and create and create and grow and grow and grow and have the hard conversations so that it can spur, insight and thought of a new way of doing it, and also get more women on those corporate boards. I think that'll help.
I think we're seeing it slowly increasing, and I think it's happening in different areas. Like, I think most recently in the professional sports world, there's a female coach being considered to be the first NBA coach, and Pau Gasol wrote an open letter advocating for her. He didn't have to do that. It served him no purpose. He had played under her for a previous team. And I think somebody who really advocated for her is not just like the best female coach for this opportunity. It's like, no, she's the best coach for this opportunity, like period, point blank. And so I think that people that are taking a risk potentially and finding their voice and advocating for somebody in that manner, but the more that happens, the more it becomes less of an anomaly and more of a common thing that happens, where it's not you're taking a risk. It's not that you have to do this dramatic open letter. It's that it becomes more of a common thing that people feel comfortable talking about and speaking openly with.
There's something I was talking about with a friend at lunch today that you just sort of made me think of this, about like having those advocates, right? And having those mentors, and that for too long, women and people of color have borne both the responsibility of like just succeeding in their normal lives and the emotional burden of the discrimination and the toll that takes over time. It's death by 1,000 cuts, right? And how many women have left tech and entertainment, not for any one specific incident, but just sort of like 10 years of exhaustion, of like, I just don't want to be spoken to like that anymore. I'll let my kids speak to me that way or whatever. I think it's a very uncomfortable moment to have to say, and I've had to say this to some of the men in my company, you have to take the emotional responsibility now for fixing this, because I can't both bear the burden of the inequality
and bear the sole burden of fixing it and fixing you. And like, I've made the personal decision that there are a few white dudes who have made me their, they say behind every woke dude is a tired feminist. And I have chosen to be that tired feminist for like a very small circle of people. And for my own sanity beyond that, I do a lot of public work and I do a lot of speaking, and my company is very much invested in this, but like, I'm not also gonna invest my emotional energy in like helping you understand why this matters. That's the work that you have to do now. And this is very uncomfortable to say to someone, is like, yeah, you have to bear the burden of fixing it, and you also have to figure out what that means. And it's not for me to now be so generous to additionally help you to do it. And they're like, but I'm really well-meaning. And it's like, well, if you're that well-meaning, get on Google and look up some things some other people have done, right? You're welcome, that was a free plug. I think this is a very challenging moment because it goes against this very like naturally pleasing nature that we have been taught of, yes, I'll take care of all of the emotional, I'll do all the emotional work, and I will also do all the work that I'm trying to do. And it turns out, if I'm trying to have a career, I can't also do all the emotional work. And that's work that we have to do in our personal relationships, right? I see so many of my women friends who are badass entrepreneurs really struggling in their interpersonal relationships around this very issue of like, if I'm going to be the career woman that I want to be and deal with it in a world that is not built for me to also maybe want to have a family, I can't also do the emotional work. And their partners are like, but nobody taught me to do it. And you're like, you're right, that's sad, get a therapist. or whatever, I know that seems, this is the shitty part. I don't like sounding this ungenerous.
Oh, can I hop in here?
Please, Maceo.
Dear friend Emily here. So she is definitely one of the tired feminists who've helped me along the way. I'll say that from where I said I pose it as an opportunity, I think that, I only stand to benefit from becoming a better leader, right? And if I can motivate and encourage all of the members of my team instead of 50% of them with innovative social techniques or speaking to people in the ways that they can understand, then my team becomes more effective. I become a better person. The whole operation works better, and I can sleep at night. There's that part of it. Then there's the other part of it of recognizing that there isn't anything to be gained by being some sort of hero or knight in shining armor. It's to recognize that when we talk about gender equity, that it's being in touch with your own sort of limitations that are surrounding gender as well, and what kind of perhaps either harm or limiting beliefs that you are facing, right? So if you look at, people are talking about this finally in the men's movement with suicides and so forth and entrepreneurial burnout. Think about the way that, again, a word we haven't used, patriarchy affects men themselves, and think about how you want to transcend the desire to be an aggressive CEO to win business and other ways that you could use innovative social strategies to win business in a way that doesn't raise your cortisol level. Your life is better this way. So internalizing it and not making it about this is a thing I'm doing for women, but a thing that I'm doing for myself to become a better person and have a positive experience. That's one thing that immediately shifts my perspective on it and the amount of energy that I have to invest in it, because I'm now personally invested in unpacking the experience that I have.
Can you drop your damn microphone?
Well, I have more to say. No.
I'll do it for you.
Okay. I think I couldn't afford it, so I'm scared too.
Do we have time for one final question?
All right, I'll ask. Hi, my name is Marianne. I own a surf school here on the west side, and I also have a sister nonprofit, and I bring at-risk youth from all over Los Angeles County to the beach. And these girls are on their local surf teams, and they're also my volunteers. I'm training them to work for me. And my question dovetails with what you guys were just talking about. I'd like to know from each of the panelists what your personal North Star is that keeps you going when it is so easy to get tired and it is so easy to get discouraged. And there's so many more voices out there that just butt up against this great mission that you have. How do you, what do you drop into? What's the thing you tell yourself when you get up in the morning and it might not be the best day, or you have to have the tough conversation that you're tired of having 1,000 times?
So we, the people who come through our program are with us very intensely Monday through Saturday for 13 weeks. And so we see them a lot. We're very, very invested in them. And we have a ton of amazing success stories. So, you know, I know that our program works. Our team is amazing. Our senior instructors are fantastic. So regardless of what, you know, issues we're trying to work out or what logistical issues we have to figure out, I know that at the heart of it, people learn really amazing skills and come out and do very, very well. And people really change their lives by coming to Sabio. So that's, you know, it's really easy to kind of bear through everything else because you know that you're making a very big impact in someone's life.
I think for me too, it's about the impact and difference that we make. Being as part of NABO, the National Association of Women Business Owners, I see women who go through tremendous trials and tribulations, but it's for the love of their business and having the freedom to own their own business and have their own voice that empowers me and inspires me. You know, I grew up in the South. I didn't share that earlier, but I grew up in the South. You had to be either black or white, and I really didn't fit at all. But I've always been for the underdog because I've always felt that the underdog truly has phenomenal power. And once we embrace that power that we are, period, we just are, then that inspires me. So going day to day, I love what I do. I love the organization. It is a volunteer position that I'm in there. I have my own company outside of that. I think I still have it there. I think they're still working, hopefully. I've been committed to NABO for a while, but it's about seeing other people really reach for their goals and know that you can help them in some way to do that by a word or direction or advocacy. It's empowering every day.
My dad will say that when the going gets tough, you just do the next right thing right. And I will tell you, on my darkest days, that feels like a manageable next thing to do. That's what does it for me.
You can only be responsible for like your own actions. Like, you can't control anything else. You can't control something that someone says to you or happens to you. You can control how you react to it and how you know, what you learn and what you move on from it. But I think it's just like really just looking into yourself and just being like, what do I have control over? What can I do today? Just like that. What's the next best thing that you can do, next right thing? I think is realizing that you don't have control over everything and being okay with that, but knowing what you do have control over. And for me, what gets me up, my why is the founders and the entrepreneurs that we get to work with every day. And so we're a nonprofit. We're accelerator style programming for early stage founders in downtown LA. No cost, no equity. We're funded by the city. And so I get to enable people's dreams and passions to come true. And that's really exciting for me to be able to be a part of that journey with these founders. And to see them, the small wins that they make. And it comes way before getting funding for them. It's just like finding that first person that believes in you, that maybe the person that wants to be your business partner, whatever it is for them. And so those are the things that really keep me going.
I would say that, you know, when I decided to leave my job and start a company, people were like, that's going to be hard. It's so much work. You're not going to sleep. Like, there were so many reasons not to do it, but I just felt like in my bones that I had to and I wanted to. And it's funny because, you know, I worked on child sex trafficking prevention for 5 years, you know, in my like late 20s, early 30s. And it was so hard to get up and think about that topic every day and for that to be my job. So now I'm like, I have a hard day, but it's still nothing compared to I just have a sense of perspective from that. And so that's really stuck with me, and it really makes everything seem like it's just going to be fine.
I'll say that mine is a little bit maybe more stoic. You're going to have shitty days whether or not you're pursuing your dreams. They might as well be moving towards the thing that you want to become and the world you want to create.